This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Otelli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Vietnam condemns China for its, quote, brutal behavior after an alleged attack on Vietnamese fishermen in the disputed South China Sea. But Beijing has a different account. Weakened but unrelenting, Typhoon Krathon slams into Taiwan's Kaohsiung, leaving at least 2 dead and dozens more injured. And the sizzling rally in Hong Kong stocks coming to a halt as investors take profits after the market surged 23% in the previous 7 sessions. Plus, Singapore's former Transport Minister S. Warren sentenced to 12 months in jail for bribery and obstruction of justice. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, many young Chinese are finding it harder to make ends meet. We hear from one woman who's struggling to pay the bills, even with 2 very different jobs. Well, we start once again with rising tensions in the South China Sea in a dispute involving Vietnam this time. Officials in Hanoi have accused Beijing of having what they call brutal behavior. And it all follows a recent incident relating to a confrontation with a Vietnamese fishing vessel in disputed waters. According to Vietnam's foreign ministry, Chinese law enforcement boarded the boats near the Paracel Islands and hit several fishermen on board. They allegedly also confiscated their fishing equipment. Now, Hanoi says that Beijing's actions seriously violated its sovereignty. Authorities say they have demanded the Chinese embassy in Hanoi to investigate the incident and asked for such situations not to happen again. But China disputes Hanoi's account of events. The foreign ministry in Beijing acknowledged an incident had taken place, but accused Vietnamese fishing boats of fishing illegally without permission. Beijing says that Chinese authorities had taken measures to stop them. Beijing also says that the operation was conducted in what it called a professional manner without any personnel injured. A local Vietnamese media pointed to a separate incident where another Vietnamese fishing boat was allegedly robbed of about $12,000 worth of equipment and fish. The allegations are a far cry from the diplomatic efforts between the countries late last year when Vietnam and China upgraded their ties and spoke of a shared future. For more, let's bring in Chong Jia-in, Associate Professor, Department of Political Science, National University of Singapore. Well, thanks for joining us, Dr. Chong. First up, help us understand how should we interpret this stark discrepancy between Vietnam and China's accounts of the incident that took place in the South China Sea?
Well, for one, it's pretty common for these different governments to come up with their different accounts of what happened. We've seen this in the case of the Philippines. We're seeing this now also with Vietnam and the PRC. So part of the messaging is, of course, to highlight their own positions and this effort to claim legitimacy. But the other why these different accounts also happen is because for many of us, we don't actually see what's happening. At best, we can see some satellite tracking, and then we see the reports, right? So this leaves a lot of gray area. And as the different claimants to the South China Sea jostle for their own positions, they will try to put their best foot forward. They will try to interpret things in ways that are advantageous to themselves, or at least, try to put the other side on the back foot a little bit.
Yeah, and Dr. Chong, I mean, this is also another area of confusion for us, right? Because how do we reconcile the warm diplomatic words exchanged during President To Lam's visit to China? I believe that was back in August, and that was his first overseas trip as new leader. And we have China's actions in this incident. Both sides had agreed, to solve disputes through friendly consultations, and yet this happened.
Well, I think what the incident highlights is how tenuous things are on the South China Sea and indeed other disputes in the region. So there can be well-intentioned efforts to reach out. But on the one hand, because these disputes are important for the various capitals, they will not back down. And on another, when you have various actors on the seas in this case, it's not completely possible to restrain all of them and make sure all of them act in ways that avoid any incidents from happening, right? So it could be a matter of these vessels meeting at sea and some incident that wasn't planned happening, right? And that's one of these contingencies that we must be prepared for with the current regional situation. So whatever the intent, whatever the sort of efforts to smooth things over, we should be prepared for things to not work as well. This also applies to the ongoing negotiations over the Code of Conduct on the South China Sea.
Also, we've talked about this before where, China has traditionally taken what we call a subtle or like a low-key approach to its territorial disputes with Vietnam. Do you think this latest incident in the Paracel Islands is going to maybe mark a shift in their relationship?
So Beijing was quite tough with Vietnam some years back, and then they sort of moderated their position. Now an incident has happened. I guess the question is whether this is a one-off, that some hot-headed people on both sides got themselves into some sort of a confrontation, or is it going to be more of a trajectory? What we'll have to watch now going forward is what both Beijing and Hanoi say, and also what they do at sea. Will there be further efforts by Vietnam to insist by showing the vessels going to areas that they claim, insist on their claims, and whether Beijing pushes back in a tough way. So that's really what we should be watching, whether a trajectory develops or if this is a one-off incident.
And in the meantime, what diplomatic levers does Vietnam have to counter China's influence?
Well, I mean, on the South China Sea, a lot of it is showing up, right, and trying to chase the other side away, and continue to show up even when the other side tries to chase you away. So that's with the South China Sea specifically. In terms of negotiation, unfortunately, I don't think things are going to go anywhere. Those claims seem quite intractable. It's very zero-sum. Either you have something, you don't have something. When the different sides are not willing to compromise on saying, well, maybe we should do more joint development, or maybe we can have some sort of accommodation that sets those sovereignty claims aside. So unfortunately, we are at a point where there's probably likely to be more friction as none of the sides are willing to back down.
What support then do you think Vietnam can expect from the international community, particularly the US, in terms of pushing back China's territorial claims? Or do you think this is just strictly going to be a bilateral thing between China and Vietnam?
I don't think the Vietnamese will go towards the US, in part because they don't have that same kind of relationship with the US that the Philippines does. The Philippines are a treaty ally, Vietnam is not. Plus, bringing in the US for Vietnam, because of that difference in relationship, is going to be a lot more escalatory. I don't think at this point Hanoi is ready to escalate things to that point. They may try to ask other ASEAN members to convey the importance of keeping the disputes non-violent, to urge restraint. But whether other ASEAN members are willing to back Hanoi up is a big question. They've been quite reluctant to extend support to Manila, right? So there's little reason why they should then extend the support that Manila had been asking to Hanoi, right? And still not withhold from support from the Philippines.
When something like this happens in the South China Sea, right, how does it impact regional trade, economic cooperation, particularly in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative?
So there's not going to be a direct effect on the Belt and Road Initiative. What this does is to highlight the friction that exists. As long as these kinds of incidents don't become commonplace, that they don't involve shipping, the sort of trade stuff should still continue. As long as the differences don't spill over into trade and investment, they could, but as long as they're contained within the territorial disputes, then the Belt and Road Initiative stuff, including the Sino-Vietnamese cooperation bits, should continue. But I guess that's a political question on whether the two sides wish to escalate, whether Hanoi wishes to withhold the further cooperation on the Belt and Road stuff, the railroad especially, whether Beijing decides it wants to pause those programs as a means to punish the other side. So again, this comes down to the sort of political posturing that both sides wish to do.
Right, and you know we've talked about how this possibly could be a one-off thing in a disputed seas. But how do you think does this reveal anything about the evolving nature of China's tactics in the South China Sea?
Well, the PRC and its various law enforcement agencies have become a lot more muscular. They've been careful not to escalate to a point where they're sinking the other side or detaining the other side, but certainly they have been willing to use low levels kinds of violence. We've seen the sort of use of brute force with the Philippines a few months ago, and in some ways this is reflective of some of the use of physical force on the Sino-Indian border. But at any rate, the PRC is ready to be more muscular, and I suppose that is a way of trying to dissuade the other sides from holding their claims. So the question is whether the other sides are willing to respond in kind or are willing to continue to contest and have this demonstration of the PRC act in ways that are seemingly disproportionate, and then to sort of make that public. That, of course, creates further friction between the different sides, and it raises the question on of how they would wish to de-escalate from that point.
All right. Always good talking to you. Thanks so very much for your insights. Chow Jia-Yen there from the National University of Singapore. At least 2 people in Taiwan have died and more than 100 injured after Typhoon Krathon made landfall earlier today. Well, the slow-moving storm had been lashing the island with strong winds and heavy rains for days as it hovered offshore before slamming into the port city of Kaohsiung as a Category 1 typhoon around noon today. Well, offices, financial markets and schools remain shut for a second day. Although Krathon has weakened, authorities warn that it remains a serious threat, urging residents to remain indoors. Krathon has been deemed an unusual storm for Taiwan, as typhoons usually hit its mountainous east coast facing the Pacific. Well, the storm is expected to weaken further in the coming days. Well, for the very latest updates, Victoria Jen, she joins us live now from Taipei. Vic, how exactly is Taiwan dealing with the typhoon, and fill us in on the latest development?
Well, right now I'm in Taipei, Neihu. It's a business district. Usually at this hour, the streets are filled with cars and people. But because of the storm, that all schools and offices are shut down. So you can see that there's barely any cars or anybody walking on the street. Now I'm feeling some of the impact of the typhoon with sporadic rain and strong wind. But the situation is actually a lot worse in southern Taiwan. Cities like Kaohsiung, Tainan, and Pingtung are among the worst hit. There have been reports of flooding and landslides. Now, authorities are clearly on high alert. 40,000 troops are on standby for rescue missions, and thousands have been evacuated from low-lying areas. Now, what is dangerous about this typhoon is the fact that it's moving very slowly. It's currently traveling at 4 to 8 kilometers per hour. So the longer it lingers and hovers over Taiwan, the more damage that it's likely to cause. Now, so far, all domestic flights and ferries services have been canceled, and about 250 international flights have been suspended. As of now, there have been more than 100 reported injuries and 2 deaths related to the typhoon. Tali?
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. You mentioned schools, offices are shut, flights also canceled. But in terms of Taiwan's businesses and its semiconductor industry, what's Krathon's impact on those?
Yeah, as far as the semiconductor industry is concerned, there is no impact. According to the Science Park in southern Taiwan, which is also home to chipmaker TSMC, they said that the operation continues as normal. But some of the small shops and restaurants in southern Taiwan have been affected by the flooding. But overall, there has been no reports of serious damage. Now, this typhoon is continue to moving south towards Taipei and is expected to barrel the entire island over the next 24 to 48 hours. But it's not likely to cause any catastrophic damage, as President William Lai has warned, because the Weather Bureau has predicted that the typhoon is likely to pass the central mountain range, and it's going to destroy the structure of the typhoon. So basically, it's likely to be downgraded to a tropical storm. But authorities are urging the residents to stay on high alert, because there are still expected to be heavy rains in many parts of Taiwan. Now, remember, this is one of the strongest typhoons to hit Taiwan in this year. So authorities are urging the residents to stay vigilant and to stay indoor for their own safety. Now, Weather Bureau predicted that this typhoon is expected to hover Taiwan over the next 2 days and is expected to leave Taiwan on Saturday.
Right, I'm going to leave you, Victoria, to seek some shelter. Well, thanks so very much for braving the rain and bringing us this report. Victoria Jen in Taipei. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, the yen diving to a one-month low against the dollar following dovish comments from Japan's new prime minister, signaling that another interest rate hike may be some way off. Also, Asian rice prices tumble on the prospect of more grain coming into the market from India. Details next. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight this Thursday. Well, standing by as usual is Roland Lim. He is ready with the very latest in business news. And Roland, that blistering rally in Hong Kong stocks seeing some kind of reversal?
That is indeed the case. Investors are taking profit from the historic surge. Now remember, they've advanced more than 30% from a September low. The Hang Seng Index slipped 1.5%, pairing off an intraday slide of 4.5%. And the Hang Seng China Enterprises Index fell as much as 4.8%. That's the most in 2 years before recovering somewhat. Now, they also snapped a 13-day winning streak. And there was massive profit-taking in property stocks as well as the tech index, declining by nearly 3.5%. Now, it's been a highly volatile week for Hong Kong trade, with mainland markets still closed for the Golden Week holidays. Traders have plowed into Hong Kong to ride the bull run sparked by China's stimulus blitz. Now, one technical indicator, the relative strength index of the China Enterprise Index, hit a record high of 91 yesterday, above the 70 threshold. And that signaled to some traders that mainland stocks listed in Hong Kong were in overbought territory. In contrast to Hong Kong, Japan's benchmark led the gains in Asia, the Nikkei 225 up 2% at the closing bell. A sigh of relief there, as Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba said that the country is not ready to further interest rate hikes. The remarks weakening the yen to a one-month low against the greenback of 147.24 level. It is currently trading at 146.86 to the dollar. South Korean markets closed for a public holiday, while Taiwan remains shuttered by Typhoon Krathon. Despite the recent volatility in Chinese and Japanese stock markets, certain sectors still present opportunities for investors. Now, I spoke to Jim Rogers, chairman of Beeland Interests, as well as a veteran investor and author, about whether he is still as bullish on China.
I own Chinese shares. It's one of the few countries where I still own shares. Of course, China will have problems down the road. But in my view, China is still going to be an extremely successful country in the future. It's one of the few countries where I still own shares.
Where are the other bright spots in investing in Asia? Which sectors are looking undervalued to you?
Well, in Japan, which you just mentioned, sectors such as they don't have any babies in Japan and they need babies. So anything to do with young people or babies will be a good place to invest. Old people, they got too many old people in Japan, so that will be a good sector. That is true of much of Asia. If you can find good ways to invest in old people or aging populations, that would be a good way to invest. In China, travel and tourism has a good future.
Toyota Motor is likely to push back the production of electric vehicles in North America. The Japanese car maker said production is likely to begin in early 2026 rather than late next year. The Nikkei had earlier reported that slowing U.S. sales are leading Toyota to delay production into the first half of 2026. Now, this would mark the first by a Japanese automaker in North America. The world's best-selling automaker had planned to start assembling an electric sports utility vehicle at its plant in Kentucky, which has invested $1.3 billion. Now, according to the Nikkei report, Toyota told suppliers that the start date will be delayed in part due to adjustments in the vehicle's design. A Toyota spokesperson said that today it planned to introduce between 5 and 7 battery electric vehicle models in the U.S. over the next 2 years. The Nikkei report also said that Toyota will cancel plans to begin producing new electric SUVs under its luxury Lexus brand in North America by 2030, instead shipping finished vehicles to the market from Japan. Global rice prices are taking a sharp dip this week after the world's biggest supplier, India, lifted export curbs. Now, its Asian counterparts, such as Pakistan, Vietnam, and Thailand, are also cutting prices in a move that experts say could help poorer Asian and African countries procure the grain more cheaply. Ishan Garg has more from New Delhi.
India's decision to lift an export ban on non-basmati white rice and halve export duty on parboiled rice has led to a decline in global rice prices. On Monday, India was selling one of its broken parboiled rice varieties at $500 to $510 per metric ton, about 5.5% lower than the week before. The correction saw exporters from Vietnam, Pakistan, Thailand and Myanmar also following suit, slashing prices by $10 per metric ton. Global prices rose to their highest level in 15 years last year when India imposed curbs on rice exports. Due to India's dominance in the global rice market, its export strategies can cause big ripples. India's rice exports accounted for nearly 40% of all global rice exports in 2022. But in 2023, the country halted its export of non-basmati white rice and imposed a 20% duty on parboiled rice exports amid fears of a domestic shortage. The grain is a staple in India, and experts say its supply could have been hampered by climate change-induced changes in weather patterns. But higher than expected monsoon rains have now led to excess production, leading the country to resume exports.
The total rice production this year, that is 2023-24, is expected to be around 137.8 million metric ton, which will be a record production in India. And probably with that much of increased production, we will have little than adequate rice required in the country.
The move could also benefit several countries in Asia and Africa that rely on India for cheap rice imports. And the knock-on effect on global rice prices could further alleviate the burden on poorer countries and their consumers.
There will be intense competition in the rice market, but at the end of the day, the consumer will be benefited with the process, and with the consumers, I'm particularly looking into these developed countries, the poor countries, because for them, softening in the rice prices will benefit them a lot.
Industry and farming bodies in India had been urging the government to resume exports so they can sell into lucrative European and American markets. While the prices have dipped for now, experts say it's too early to call the long-term impact it will have. At home, however, the move is unlikely to ease the burden on Indian households. Domestic rice prices are projected to not budge a lot as the cost of producing rice from farmers is expected to remain stable. Ashan Garg, CNA, New Delhi.
That is the latest business at this hour. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for a break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Singapore sentences a former senior cabinet minister to 12 months in jail for bribery and obstruction of justice. Plus, South Korea's largest defense exhibition happening today as the country aims to boost its status as a top arms exporter. Vietnam condemns China for its, quote, brutal behavior after an alleged attack on Vietnamese fishermen in the disputed South China Sea. Taiwan has hunkered down and shut down for a second day as Typhoon Krathon makes landfall. 2 people have died, the stock markets shut, and hundreds of flights grounded. Double-digit declines in the Hang Seng Mainland Properties Index weighing on the wider Hong Kong market. Stocks erased some of yesterday's gains, adding to what's already been a volatile week. Singapore has sentenced S. Iswaran, a former senior cabinet minister, to 12 months in prison in a high-profile criminal case that brought an end to his 27-year political career. In a surprise decision by the court, his punishment is double what the prosecution had sought. Sabrina Ng takes us through what happened in court.
It was a similar sight the public had seen just days ago. At around 9:30 a.m., the former transport minister arrived at the doors of Singapore's highest court. But this time, he entered the courtroom as a convicted man, awaiting his sentence.
Have you spoken to your family? Have you spoken to your family and friends? What are you expecting for today?
Then, at 10 a.m., his sentencing promptly began. In less than an hour, Justice Vincent Hung, who oversaw the case, read out his judgment in front of a packed courtroom.
She refuted several arguments put forth by the defence. For instance, on the matter of Iswaran voluntarily returning funds to the state a day before the trial, Justice Hung had said that the harm done to public interest cannot be adequately remedied by such efforts.
Public interest was a central part of the judge's considerations. Iswaran pleaded guilty in his 24th September trial to 4 charges under Section 165, an offence so rare that there have been no previously reported cases since Singapore's independence. The judge stressed that the law's purpose is to safeguard the integrity of public institutions and the public interests. And so, general deterrence took centre stage in Iswaran's sentencing. The judge said his actions had fallen below the standards of integrity and accountability, which in turn could have a detrimental impact on how the government carries out its functions. The judge also said holders of high office have a higher impact on public interests and therefore need to conduct themselves in accordance with their status. He cited Iswaran's former role as transport minister as one that heightened the latter's culpability. At one point, Justice Hung referred to an all-expenses-paid trip Iswaran had taken to Doha, one he had claimed was for urgent personal leave. Justice Hung was also unpersuaded by the defence's argument that gifts from Mr. Ong Beng Seng and Mr. Lam Kok Seng were given to Iswaran under the guise of friendship. Instead, he stressed that Iswaran had accepted valuable items knowingly from individuals involved with his position as then transport minister. The judge also noted that Iswaran had been a minister for 6 to 10 years when the offences were committed. Part of the defence's argument had been that the former transport minister contributed significantly to the country in the capacity of his former roles. This was dismissed by the judge as a, quote, neutral factor at best. Iswaran's earlier statements rejecting the allegations as false and asserting his innocence were also raised by Justice Hung. He did not believe Iswaran felt remorse. Then came the moment that shocked the courtroom. The judge passing down a sentence that will see Iswaran behind bars for an unexpected 12 months. Throughout the process, a grim Iswaran had his eyes cast downwards, emotionless, as the sentence was read. In the gallery, his wife wiped away a single tear as court adjourned for the day. At about 11:30 a.m., Iswaran left court with only brief words.
I have no comments at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Iswaran, are you appealing? Will you be appealing? Will you appeal against? Will you be attendance?
Iswaran's lead lawyer, Davinder Singh, requested a deferral of the jail term to begin next Monday, with his client surrendering at the state court that day. But he emphasized that this is contingent on receiving further instructions from Iswaran, hinting at a potential appeal. In the meantime, Iswaran remains out on bail at 800,000 Singapore dollars.
South Korea has signed a deal to buy suicide drones from Poland. This is the first time Seoul is buying weapons from Warsaw. South Korea's defense ministry says the drones have proven their effectiveness in a Ukraine war and will be important for bolstering defenses against North Korea. The deal was done yesterday on the sidelines of a key defense exhibition in Seoul. And our correspondent Lim Yeon-suk has more on the event.
Until about 4 years ago, South Korea's arms exports stood at about 2 to 3 billion US dollars. But that surged to about 7.3 billion US dollars in 2021 and 17.3 billion US dollars in 2022. This year, it's hoping to increase that amount to about 20 billion US dollars. And that's why defense exhibitions like this one are important to South Korea. The Korea Army International Defense Industry Exhibition takes place this week at South Korea's military headquarters of Kaerongdae, about 145 kilometers south of Seoul. It's been attended by high-ranking officials from more than 25 countries, including Poland. At the opening ceremony on Wednesday, Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun said one of the main reasons South Korea has been able to grow its defense industry was due to its conflict with North Korea. The 3-year Korean War concluded with an armistice in 1953, but a permanent peace treaty was never signed.
세계 유일한 분단국으로 아직도 전쟁이 끝나지 않은 나라, 공산 독재 세력과 군사적으로 첨예하게 대립하고 있는 나라다 보니 그 어떤 나라의 무기보다 실전적이라는 것입니다.
More than 300 companies are participating in the 5-day exhibition to showcase South Korea's military weapons. South Korea is currently the world's 10th largest exporter of arms, but is aiming to become the 4th by 2027. And many taking part in this exhibition say that's possible, as South Korea's defense industry has been steadily growing, prompting global companies like this Swedish firm to see it as a competitor.
There has always been an intent from the Korean governmental side to be self-sufficient and self-supporting when it comes to defense material. But from the Korean side, you have also had a very rapid development based on domestic needs, but also over the years improving quality, delivery capability, price levels, and so on.
Some experts we spoke with agree South Korea will be able to achieve its goal of becoming a top arms exporter, as the sector is a priority for the government.
한국에서는 인적 자원에 굉장히 투자를 많이 하고 있고 이 인적 자원을 개발한다는 것은 하루 이틀에 되는 것은 아니거든요. 한국에서는 그동안 그것이 계속 누적돼 왔고 이 축적된 기술들이 결국 군사 분야로 가느냐 민간 분야로 가느냐의 그 차이인데 이미 한국에서 우리 정부에서는 국방 분야로 많이 가겠다라고 분명히 목표를 설정을 했고요.
To get there, South Korea is also hoping to win deals with more countries. It currently exports defense technology to 12 countries, but wants to grow that list. One potential market could be Vietnam, which used to get most of its supplies from Russia. The two governments had earlier agreed to expand cooperation in several areas, including defense and high-tech industries. Lim Yeon-suk, CNA, Kaerong City, Chungcheong Province, South Korea.
The Global Cybersecurity Forum annual meeting is taking place in Riyadh, focused on strengthening cyber resilience and digital protection. India's former Foreign Secretary, Shyam Saran, spoke to us earlier from the event, weighing in on China-India relations and why the border dispute between the two countries continues to remain a contentious issue.
There are certain issues on which India and the US have certain common perceptions, they have certain common interests, and certainly maritime security is one of them. And to the extent that we see China expanding its influence and presence in the Indian Ocean area, which is a very, very strategic space for India, wherever we can cooperate with other actors, in terms of making sure that there is a certain balance which is maintained in this region, that the safety and security of sea lanes is taken care of. I think it would be very difficult for us to manage the emerging situation. Challenge for India is that, we are in a particular era where China is rising, but India is rising as well. Both are, emerging powers in Asia. So I don't think it is at all surprising that there are certain overlapping peripheries. There are points of possible contention between the two countries, and how we manage to try to ameliorate those kind of contestations, I think it is in our interest. Make no mistake, I mean, India is also engaged in a regular dialogue with China to make sure that there are no misperceptions, no misunderstandings. So even though we have had a major problem with China recently with regard to the border issue, the engagement between the two countries has continued. And we are engaged in a dialogue, even with respect to the border issue. We have several rounds of discussion between our military personnel, between our diplomatic personnel. Some of the issues have been resolved, some remain to be resolved. But I think the good news is that both countries see it in their interest to continue their engagement. What is important is that both countries are committed to maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. They had been able to do that for nearly 40 years before the clashes took place a couple of years ago. But I think it is important to register that both countries are currently engaged in trying to make the situation manageable, reduce the element of contestation, and see whether there are issues of global significance like climate change, for example, for multilateral trade, where the two countries have similar kind of interests, similar kind of perspectives. Can they work together on those?
We're going to take a breather now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, we hear from one Chinese woman whose dilemma is all too familiar. Despite holding two jobs, she can't make ends meet. That story coming up next. Climate change is testing Tokyo's flood defenses. Authorities have begun upgrading one of Japan's engineering marvels, an intricate underground network of tunnels that help divert floods and prevent potential disasters in the capital.
It looks like a secret underground cavern from the set of a movie, but it's actually a facility designed to keep Tokyo from flooding. It is one part of a growing system to ensure the expected increase in rainfall doesn't overcome the Japanese capital. Helping to oversee the expansion of this underground system is Shun Otomo.
ますますこれから気候変動に伴いまして、そういった雨が頻発化するとともに、さらに大きな被害が出ると考えられております。そのため我々としてはこういった治水施設を整備することを強化して、都民の安全安心を確保していくといったことを考えております。
59 massive pillars that are 59 feet high and weigh 500 tons each make up what is known as the underground chamber here north of Tokyo. It has enough volume to fit almost 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water. When nearby rivers flood, the overflow courses through nearly 4 miles of massive underground tunnels before collecting here in what is officially known as the Metropolitan Outer Area Underground Discharge Channel. Facilities like this one help protect Tokyo from a changing climate, being tracked by Tokyo University Professor of Environmental Science and Climate Risk, Seita Emori.
今、温暖化の長期的な傾向が続いていますので、これからも気温が上がってさらに強い雨が、これから降ると今まで降らなかったような記録的な雨が降るということが、想定されます。
The summer of 2024 was the hottest since records began in 1898, Japan's weather agency said in September. In Tokyo, sudden, violent storms known as gorilla downpours have become increasingly common. Tokyo's flood defenses went into action on August 30th as security cameras captured water pouring into the underground cathedral as a typhoon lashed southwest Japan nearly 400 miles away. The system kicked in 4 times in June, more than all of last year. During Typhoon Shanshan, it captured enough water to fill the Tokyo Dome baseball stadium almost 4 times before pumping it safely into the Edogawa River and out to sea. Work is also underway using a colossal tunneling machine to ground a path through the earth below Tokyo. The aim is to capture vast quantities of rain that might otherwise flood the streets above.
China is raising the retirement age next year, the first time it's doing so since the 1950s. It's a response to people living longer and the workforce getting smaller. But for many young people in China, thinking about retiring, they say, is out of the question. Well, earlier, CNA's Money Mind spoke to a young woman who's living a Jekyll and Hyde existence just to survive.
Saving for retirement is low on Lia Deng's list of priorities as she hustles between two jobs. The 27-year-old is a piano teacher by day and dancer in a bar by night. But even with two jobs, she can't quite make ends meet. Longer-term financial goals are far from her mind.
自从我做了独立老师之后，我也是没有去交社保和养老金这个东西的，因为对于我来说，现在就是最基本的生存问题，就是我要去有没有盈利，我没有足够的钱去，就多余的钱去支付这个养老金。
Lia graduated with a music degree 4 years ago. This year, she moved to downtown Shanghai, where her apartment also serves as her studio. The rent for the apartment is 8,800 renminbi, or $1,200 a month.
7月份我上了12节课。
Her music lessons only earn her about half that, about 5,000 renminbi, or $700 a month.
我这个月应该能上20节课，或者是更多。我现在在化妆，为了我晚上的兼职的工作做准备。等一下11点到3点半是我在酒吧做气氛组的工作时间。
To cover her rent, Lia has taken on a second job as a nightclub dancer. Her base salary is about 200 renminbi, or $28 per night. To earn more, she has to bring people to the club. Lia's total earnings are about 10,000 renminbi every month, which covers her rent with very little left over. She can't afford the minimum sum required for Social Security contributions. If she wanted to contribute to her pension and medical insurance, that would amount to about 2,200 renminbi, or over $300 every month. That's money she just doesn't have.
我个人的话，我对养老金的看法是，如果你有多余的钱，你可以考虑这个。那如果就是像我这种，就是手头比较拮据的，就是我可能会更希望这个钱是放在自己的手上。
Youth unemployment in China continues to be high, with around 17% unemployed in July. For those who are employed, a growing number are freelancers.
我觉得更多不交养老金的人，可能是因为他们没有一个全职的工作，所以如果说你有一个全职的工作的话，其实你不需要去考虑这个问题的，因为公司会帮助你去交它。那当我们是自由职业或者是失业人员的一个状态下，那可能他没有办法去考虑这个问题，因为他要先考虑怎么去生存，去过好现在的一个生活，有一个好的生活状态，才能去考虑养老金的问题。
The shrinking number of working-age Chinese and rising number of retirees is putting tremendous strain on the pension system. According to the state-run Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the public pension system is expected to run out of money over the next decade.
The youth population has a very high chance that they will need to contribute more to the system to basically make it sustainable. So I think this will be the biggest cost or biggest risk that they would face in terms of this bigger burden, let alone the long-term issue on whether they would also be able to receive their pension in their generation when they retire.
To ease the pressure on the state pension, the government launched a private pension scheme 2 years ago. The so-called Third Pillar Private Retirement Savings Scheme sits alongside the state and corporate pension plans. 32-year-old Wing Fan became a personal wealth manager about a year ago.
很多人可能还是在停留在过往，说对自己的生活可能是希望说靠政府养老或者靠买房子养老这样的一个思维。其实现在未来对我们生活的一个规划，不能单单再用以前的思维，需要更多的去学习。
She's not a full-time employee, and her company does not contribute to her corporate pension.
因为我有帮自己再供一份就是商业的养老金，那一份商业养老金呢，我自己的计划就是想说在40岁存够100万。那其实平均算下来的话，我现在每个月大概是要存8000左右的一个费用。但对于我来说，因为我的生活压力并不是很大，所以的话，其实这个区间对于我来说不会说太困难，但是会做一个相比存钱之前会做一个减法，比如说少乱买东西啊，一些不需要的东西就减少支出啊，这样子去让自己把钱存起来。
To save for retirement, the onus is increasingly on the individual.
Pension is not the only factor for retirement. The wealth can also come from other sources, and I also do not think that because of basically this growing, aging society in China, it will be that feasible to solely rely on the government in the future. So I do think that they will probably need to find ways to invest and save more.
在我20来岁的时候，确实我自己也是几乎是月光的，几乎是存不了钱。但是有些事情就是靠某一天你自己下定决心去做，然后就开始做了，而不是说我等怎么赚到达到一定的数才去存这个钱。其实所谓的存钱，并不是说你要达到多少钱，然后再开始去存才能怎么去做，而是你是不是真的有决心去为自己做一个计划。
But for other young people like Leah, that kind of planning is not something for today.
觉得我现在还年轻，不需要太考虑这个问题。对我来说，需要我有一个稳定的生活和工作状态之后，我才会去考虑这个东西。我觉得当我的收入大概在3万的样子，我会去考虑交养老金。现在的年轻人就是有很多没有去交养老金的一个趋势。因为我觉得可能是因为。就是大家现在更想要就是活在当下。
It's really fascinating stuff. You can watch this and more on Money Mind's full China retirement episode on YouTube and channelnewsasia.com. On that note, it's time to wrap up this Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And, of course, you can always find us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.